Hey gang, Jake here. I feel like when we talk about crossover games, especially in the case of Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, we tend to focus a ton on the flashy elements of the games. Who's showing up, who's not, etc, etc. I understand that, because I focus on it a lot too, but I think we leave out a lot of important aspects in speculation. I want to give those aspects a bit of a spotlight, because they're fun to talk about, and I think there's a lot of stuff NASB can do that can really make this game special. So let's get into it. So first off, let's talk about the story. Fighting games have never really been known for telling groundbreaking stories, which isn't necessarily a serious issue. However, not having necessarily a great story, but a great concept, can really up the interest factor of a fighting game. I think the best example of this is Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Which doesn't have a story mode, but has a CG short and a very short comic book style intro that explain the context of the crossover. We immediately understand the alliance of villains forming, we understand why the heroes are fighting, and we immediately get an interesting setup for an arcade mode boss in the form of Galactus. None of this is necessary, but the little details and tidbits we get are a super nice aspect of the game, and it makes the thought of a story very compelling. For a game like NASB, I think a story premise would make a lot of sense, because Nick has always enjoyed telling stories about their characters meeting up. The entire Nicktoons Unite franchise is an example of that, and despite those games' flaws, the premises were always really interesting. So something like that could be really cool if it made a comeback, but how? In fighting game stories, it can be really difficult to create interesting situations, but I think the best pick is yet another villain syndicate. A group of bad guys from across the Nicktoons multiverse who come together to make conquering vastly easier. As for who's the lead of this League of Evil, that's a little bit tougher. In Nicktoons Unite, that role fell to Professor Calamitous, as he was the rival of Jimmy, the character who brought the heroes together. However, I doubt Calamitous is going to be around for this game, so I think the responsibility should fall to Zim. He's the only Nicktoons protagonist who could easily slot into a villainous role, and he's one of Nick's best characters, so giving him center stage would be perfect. Despite all this, he's only been an antagonist in 2 games, one of which is a Pokemon Snap photography game, and one of which is an edutainment game, the only proof of which's existence I can find is an Amazon listing and my own cartridge. As such, I think he's still got a whole lot of mileage as a villain, and he would be so much fun to use. As for the heroic counter to Zim, I think Jimmy makes the most sense. He's responsible for gathering the heroes in Nicktoons Unite and Globs of Doom, so him being the Nick Fury / Amanda Waller of this story would fit the character really well. So all in all, my pitch for this game's premise is that Zim has gathered the villains of the Nicktoons universe and is teaming up with them to mind control the heroes into evil, and Jimmy has to lead the charge to stop this takeover. Personally, I think that'd be pretty sick, and it leaves the opportunity open for a really cool classic mode. So arcade mode endings have been a staple of fighting games pretty much ever since the genre's birth, and they can be a lot of fun in crossover games. From imagining new chances for heroes to be stronger, to fights we'd never see in reality, they can be a really neat reward for a relatively basic mode. However, Smash has never really messed with this. We don't have endings so much as short videos or screenshots in Ultimate. I think NASB has the opportunity to do some really cool stuff from this angle, and I want to see it. For instance, let's look at a character like Leonardo and consider what he could have for an ending. Maybe he does some work on relocating displaced people across the Nicktoons universe, and ends up battling the Blue Spirit in the Hidden City. Maybe Mikey meets up with his other dimensional counterparts to throw the greatest party of all time. Maybe Jenny gets some upgrades and becomes a multi-dimensional superhero. There's tons of possibilities, and it's a relatively cheap way to reward players who put the time in and build familiarity with the game's systems. However, there's another way this game could have some great crossover content. It's much less likely, and it would be very expensive, but something that would blow a lot of people's minds is an adventure mode. So back to the Nicktoons Unite games, they were always an interesting little experience, and while they certainly had their cons, some of the most common compliments I see the games get is that they feel like an actual crossover that could air on network TV. Seeing the characters get proper interactions and dialogue felt like a really special experience, and while I don't want to burden Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl with that idea, if properly executed, it could be a super exciting opportunity for fans. So how would you handle it? How do you approach such a concept? Well, I think the best approach is something like Subspace Emissary, with a little more production value and a lot less seriousness? You know what I mean. If it were up to me, I'd roll with the same concept. Zim assembles a team of bad guys to take over the multiverse, and Jimmy has to gather heroes to stop them. However, to further that end, I'd tack on a mind control plot device, to vary the story's gameplay so you're not just fighting, Zim drones all the time. In addition, I'd make the story's starting heroes the crew from Nicktoons Unite, as a sort of a big finale to that series with the benefit of a fighting game roster as opposed to a platformer roster. I'd make it a sort of a mission mode, where the player chooses which tasks they want to take on, and they work within an environment and use the characters assigned to it to perform that task. For instance, maybe near the beginning of the story, Timmy Turner's wish magic would stop working, so you'd play as Danny and SpongeBob and help him go to Fairy World to find out why. Maybe in a similar vein, Sandy and Jimmy go on a trek through New York to find some Krang tech that could help further their goals. These scenarios would grant opportunities for some really fun interactions, as well as give the player a chance to run into more characters to unlock, creating an ever-expanding team. As for dialogue, I know voice acting is very tragically unlikely at this point, but even getting dialogue in the form of text, or maybe bringing in VAs and a post-release update after the game has made some money, would be so important to this game's appeal. Let me get some interactions between characters that make perfect sense together, or characters that make no sense together. Just make it as fun as possible, and a rewarding experience for players who stick with it. The last thing I want to talk about is a final boss. This isn't something I expect greatness out of, because pretty much every fighting game struggles to have a final boss that's exceptional. However, I think a pick that nails the scale of a conflict can go a long way. For instance, despite not necessarily being amazing fights, Taboo and Ultron Omega from Brawl and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite have this aura to them that really makes them feel like a powerful finale. As for who that is in Nickelodeon, I think some people may want to default to the Jerkinator, the final antagonist of the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour trilogy, but I don't feel like he'd really fit. He doesn't have much to pull from in terms of attacks, and he kinda reached a character finale as he retired from evil. You could have Zim attack with some giant robot, but I don't know if that would have the punch I'm looking for. I think one that could be interesting is bringing back the Magu from Battle for Volcano Island. From what I understand, the fight against him in that game was kinda underwhelming, so giving this design and antagonist another opportunity to be an exciting conclusion to a fun game would be great. Say that Zim grabbed him from another dimension to cause trouble for the heroes, or even that he's been guiding Zim the whole time. Whatever they decide on, this could be a really cool shot to do justice to an underserved design, and that kind of opportunity is really cool to see. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the new and improved audio. My apologies for it sounding like garbage in the previous videos, but I'm still figuring out a lot of stuff about this YouTube thing, so we're just going to carry on from here. If you're here for Frame Makers, I'm sorry for the dry spell on that content, but with NASB coming out relatively soon, I want to get some videos out for that, and honestly, I think I'm kind of burnt out on Frame Makers stuff. In order to cover that game, I have to do a lot of research and play a lot of games. And while I love having that option, when I'm slammed with stuff I need to do in my offline life, it's a lot easier to just binge cartoons, honestly. We'll get back to it at some point, but that's why it's taking so long. I hope you guys were willing to stick around. With all that out of the way, I'm gonna head out. Peace out.